The first time my name disappeared, it was from a seating chart. I noticed it on Thanksgiving afternoon, standing in my parents' kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder, watching my younger sister tape handwritten name cards to the long oak table. Everyone had a place. My parents at the head, my brother beside his wife, my sister next to her fiancé. Even my aunt, who always arrived late and complained about the food, had a card. Mine was missing. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. That kind of small oversight happens in families all the time. I waited, towel still in my hands, listening to the scrape of chairs and the low hum of conversation, expecting someone to notice. No one did. I finally asked lightly, as if it didn't matter. "Hey, where am I sitting?" My sister didn't look up. She pressed another piece of tape flat, smoothing it with her thumb. "Oh, Mom said you could just squeeze in somewhere. You don't mind, right?" She said it the way people say things when they've already decided the answer. I nodded. Of course I didn't mind. I never did. I was 31 years old, unmarried, the oldest child in a family that treated me like a placeholder, someone who could be moved, adjusted, absorbed wherever there was extra space, someone whose flexibility was praised until it became expected. That Thanksgiving wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. I sat at the corner of the table, half turned so others could pass behind me, balancing my plate carefully. Conversations flowed around me. Promotions, wedding plans, a new house my brother and his wife were buying near my parents' place. No one asked about my work. I had recently accepted a senior role at a logistics firm downtown. It was the kind of promotion that came with longer hours and quiet satisfaction, not applause. I hadn't announced it. I'd learned that news only mattered in this family if it fit their narrative. My mother leaned toward my sister at one point and said, "Once the wedding is over, we'll finally have time to talk about the will." She didn't lower her voice. My sister smiled. My brother nodded. I took a sip of water and kept my eyes on my plate. It wasn't the first time inheritance had come up as if I wasn't there. I'd always assumed it was unintentional, that they simply forgot I could hear. That was the story I told myself anyway. Later that evening, as dishes were cleared and leftovers packed into containers with other people's names written in marker, my father pulled me aside. "You're okay, right?" he asked, not really asking. "Of course," I said. He patted my shoulder, already distracted. "You've always been so independent. We never worry about you." That sentence followed me home. Independent in my family was not a compliment. It was a justification. It meant I needed less, asked for less, deserved less. In the weeks that followed, small things began to stack up. My birthday came and went with a text from my mother sent close to midnight. No card, no dinner. My sister called the next day to ask if I could help address invitations for her wedding. "You're so organized," she said. "You're better at this stuff than I am." I spent an entire Saturday writing names that weren't mine. The wedding plans became a constant background noise. Seating charts again, guest lists, who would sit where, who mattered, who didn't. I listened, offered opinions when asked, stepped back when I wasn't. At work, things were different, clear, direct. When I signed something, it meant something. When I spoke, people listened. I didn't have to guess my place. The contrast was unsettling. One evening in early December, my mother asked me to come over. Just me, no explanation. She poured tea and sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same one where Thanksgiving had happened. She folded her hands carefully. "We've been thinking," she said, "about the future." I waited. "Your father and I want to simplify things," she continued. "Avoid complications later." I nodded. "That makes sense." She smiled, relieved. "We knew you'd understand." That was when she slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents. Drafts, she said. Not final, just outlines. My brother and sister's names appeared repeatedly. Trusts, property. The family business my parents had owned for decades now, mostly managed by my brother. My name appeared once, in a paragraph labeled contingent. "If something happens to them," my mother said quickly, "then of course you'd be considered." Considered. I closed the folder. "I thought this was already decided," I said carefully, "years ago." My mother's smile tightened. "Things change." I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't ask why. I asked one question instead. "Do I need a lawyer?" The room went very quiet. My mother looked genuinely surprised. "Why would you do that?" I met her eyes, to understand my position. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "You don't need to complicate this. We're family." That word again, family, used like a shield, like a boundary I wasn't allowed to cross. I drove home that night with the folder on the passenger seat unopened. At a red light, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from clarity. The seating chart had not been a mistake. The forgotten birthday, the casual way my future had been discussed without me. This wasn't neglect. It was design. I pulled into my driveway and sat there longer than necessary, engine running, lights off. Somewhere inside the house, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister. "Can you help with one more thing for the wedding?" I didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I didn't step in to fill the gap. I picked up the folder, carried it inside, and placed it on my desk. I didn't open it again that night, but I knew something had shifted. I had been excluded quietly for years, and now that I could see it, I understood something else just as clearly. Whatever came next would not be loud. It would be deliberate. I didn't open the folder for 3 days. It sat on my desk like an accusation, the edges of the manila slightly bent where my mother had held it too tightly. Every time I passed by, I felt the urge to flip it open, to reread every page until I could explain it away, to find some hidden reassurance between the lines. I resisted that urge on purpose. I had learned over time that my first instinct in family matters was always to soften the truth, to round the edges, to tell myself stories that made other people's behavior easier to carry. This time I wanted the truth sharp. On the fourth morning before work, I made coffee and sat down. I read slowly, not emotionally, the way I read contracts at the office. The language was polite, neutral, even affectionate in places. Phrases like "out of fairness" and "to avoid future conflict" appeared more than once, but the structure was unmistakable. My parents' assets would pass almost entirely to my brother and sister. The family business would remain under my brother's control, with provisions to ensure my sister benefited without responsibility. I would receive a modest sum contingent on circumstances beyond my control, distributed at a time not of my choosing. It was exclusion wrapped in courtesy. I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair. The feeling that settled in my chest wasn't heartbreak, it was recognition. So this is how it's been. Memories rearranged themselves quietly. My parents insisting my brother had more pressure when he was younger. My sister being allowed to move back home rent-free after college, while I'd been praised for figuring it out on my own. The way my achievements were acknowledged vaguely, without details, as if specifics might invite comparison. I hadn't been invisible. I'd been inconvenient. That afternoon, I had lunch with a colleague who'd become a friend. We talked about work, about deadlines, about nothing in particular. I almost told her I didn't. Some things need time to settle before they can be spoken. The first call came that evening, my mother. "I hope you're not upset," she said before I could say hello. "I'm not," I replied. That was true. "We just assumed you'd be okay with this," she continued. "You're so capable. You've always landed on your feet." There it was again. Capability used as a reason to withhold support. "I understand," I said. She sounded relieved. "Good, I knew you would." We hung up. I sat on the couch, phone still in my hand, staring at the wall. I realized something then that unsettled me more than the documents. She hadn't asked how I felt. She had checked whether I would comply. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, wedding plans intensified. My sister called often, usually with requests. Could I help review contracts? Could I talk to the florist? Could I manage RSVPs? She said it all with affection, with familiarity. I said yes out of habit. At the office, year-end reviews were underway. My boss praised my performance, hinted at future leadership roles. I listened, nodded, thanked him. I thought about the two versions of myself moving through the same days. One trusted, one taken for granted. The wedding invitation arrived in the mail, formal and heavy. My name was printed correctly. But when I checked the details, I noticed something else. I wasn't seated with family. I was placed at a table labeled "Friends of the Bride." I stared at the card longer than necessary. This wasn't an oversight. Seating charts require intention. When I brought it up to my sister, she laughed lightly. "It's just logistics," she said. "You don't mind, right?" I heard myself say, "Of course not." But something inside me shifted. The word logistics echoed unpleasantly, as if relationships could be optimized, as if I were an extra piece moved to make the arrangement smoother. Christmas Eve arrived quietly. I went to my parents' house as I always did, brought gifts, smiled, helped in the kitchen. At one point, my father mentioned the will, again joking about how everything's basically settled. I said nothing. After dinner, as we sat around the living room, my sister pulled out her laptop to show wedding photos. My brother leaned over her shoulder. My parents beamed. I watched them from the armchair a few feet away, unnoticed. It wasn't anger I felt. It was distance. Later that night, my mother asked if I could stop by the next day. "There's just one more thing to sign," she said casually. "Nothing major." I paused. "What kind of thing?" I asked. "Oh, just acknowledgement," she replied. "You don't need to read too much into it." That sentence landed heavily. I told her I'd think about it. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark coat still on and let the silence settle. For years, I had mistaken this family's quietness for peace. I'd believed the absence of conflict meant the presence of care. Now I understood the difference. Silence can be a strategy. I picked up my phone and searched for something I had never needed before. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to threaten anyone, because I wanted to understand the rules of a game I'd apparently been playing without knowing. Lawyer near me. I didn't call yet, I just saved the number. Outside, Christmas lights blinked on neighboring houses. The season everyone associated with warmth and togetherness felt strangely clarifying. I had spent years assuming my place was flexible because love was secure. I was starting to see that my flexibility had been the foundation of everyone else's comfort, and comfort once established is rarely surrendered willingly. I went to bed knowing that whatever they wanted me to sign tomorrow, I would not do it blindly. Not anymore. The next conversation would change the shape of everything. I arrived at my parents' house the next morning, 10 minutes early. Not because I was eager, because I wanted to see who else was there. My mother's car was in the driveway. My father's too. My brother's truck was parked on the street, angled the way he always did when he expected to stay a while. My sister's wasn't there yet. That told me enough. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and pine cleaner. Everything looked arranged, not festive, prepared. My mother greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're early," she said. "So are you," I replied. She didn't comment. She gestured toward the dining table. The same one. There was a single folder this time, thicker than the last. My father sat at the head, glasses on, already reading something. My brother sat to his right, scrolling on his phone. No one stood up. I took the chair opposite them. "This won't take long," my father said without looking up. "We just need your acknowledgement so everything can move forward cleanly." Cleanly for whom, I asked. That made him look at me. My brother glanced up too, eyebrows raised as if surprised I'd spoken at all. "It's just procedural," my mother said quickly. "We're finalizing documents before the wedding. You understand how busy things are." I reached for the folder but didn't open it. "I'd like to know what I'm acknowledging," I said. My brother laughed softly. "You always overthink this stuff." I looked at him. "Do I?" He shrugged. "It's already decided." There it was, again. I opened the folder then. Inside were several pages clipped together. A cover letter from an estate planning firm. My name appeared multiple times this time, but not in the way one hopes. The document was a waiver, not of inheritance entirely, but of contest. A formal acknowledgement that I understood and accepted the distribution as written, and that I would not challenge it in the future. My mother leaned forward. "This is just to avoid misunderstandings later." Later, I repeated. "Yes," she said. "After we're gone, we don't want resentment." I read the page again, slowly. "So this means," I said, "that I'm agreeing not to question decisions I didn't help make." My father cleared his throat. "It's standard." "I've read enough contracts to know what standard looks like," I replied. "This isn't that." My brother sighed. "Why are you making this difficult?" I didn't answer right away. I noticed the way my mother's hands were folded tightly in her lap. The way my father avoided my eyes, the way my brother leaned back, confident, bored. They weren't nervous. They were annoyed. That realization changed something fundamental. "You didn't tell me this was coming," I said calmly. My mother frowned. "We told you we were thinking about the future." "You told me it was settled," I replied, "years ago." My father waved a hand. "Things evolve." "For everyone but me," I said. The room went quiet, not shocked, just uncomfortable. My mother tried again. "You're still included. This isn't exclusion." I tapped the page lightly. "Then why do I need to sign away my right to object?" No one answered. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table. "I won't sign this today," I said. My brother straightened. "You can't just refuse." "I can," I replied. "And I am." My mother's voice sharpened. "You're being unreasonable." "No," I said. "I'm being careful." My father leaned forward, then finally engaged. "What do you want?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that. "I want time," I said, "and independent advice." My brother laughed again, this time without humor. You're going to bring in a lawyer over this? Yes, I said. My mother looked genuinely hurt. Why don't you trust us? I met her gaze, because trust doesn't require waivers. That landed harder than I expected. My father pushed his chair back slightly. My brother's jaw tightened. This will complicate things, my father said. I know, I replied. That's selfish, my brother said flatly. I nodded. It probably looks that way to you. My sister arrived then, late and breathless, interrupting the moment. She took in the scene quickly, the closed folder, the tension. What's going on? She asked. My mother spoke first. Your sister is refusing to sign. My sister looked at me. Why? I held her gaze. Because I don't understand why I'm being asked to give up rights I never used. She blinked. It's not about you. That sentence settled into the room like dust. I know, I said quietly. That's the problem. I stood, picked up my coat. This isn't the time, my father said. It is for me, I replied. I left without another word. In the car, my phone buzzed, a text from my brother. You're blowing this out of proportion. Don't embarrass the family. I didn't respond. I drove home slowly, hands steady on the wheel. I felt strangely calm. Not victorious, not afraid, resolved. That afternoon I made the call I'd been putting off. The lawyer's office was small, quiet. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the situation. She asked precise questions, took notes. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. You're not wrong to pause, she said, and you're not imagining the imbalance. What are my options? I asked. She smiled faintly, more than they'd like you to believe. When I left her office, the sky had darkened. Winter clouds pressed low. I walked to my car feeling something unfamiliar. Not rage, agency. That night my sister called, then my mother, then my father. I let them all go to voicemail. For the first time I understood that silence could belong to me too. And that refusing to sign was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of leverage. The lawyer asked me not to contact my family for a week. Let the temperature settle, she said. People reveal more when they think the moment has passed. I agreed, though it went against every instinct I'd been trained to have. In my family, distance was treated as disrespect, silence as punishment. I had learned early that responsiveness was the price of belonging. For 7 days, I didn't pay that price. The calls slowed after the first 48 hours. Texts followed a predictable arc. Concern, confusion, irritation. Then finally quiet. In that quiet, things surfaced. At work, I was assigned to oversee a merger integration project that had stalled under previous leadership. It required precision, patience, and the ability to say no without apology. I found myself doing it easily, calmly. It struck me how rarely I felt this capable at home. Midweek, my lawyer called. I reviewed the documents you brought, she said. There's something you should know. I listened. The waiver they want you to sign isn't just about inheritance, she continued. It also limits your ability to question past transfers, including interests in the family business. I closed my eyes. They're trying to lock in decisions already made, she said, without scrutiny. Were those decisions legal, I asked. She paused. That depends on timing, intent, and disclosure, all of which you were excluded from. Excluded. There it was again. Not accidental, not emotional, procedural. We scheduled a follow-up meeting. She advised me to request full disclosure of assets and prior transfers, formally, in writing. They may resist, she said. I expect them to, I replied. The letter went out the next day. Polite, neutral, unemotional. A request for information, not an accusation. The response was immediate. My father called within an hour. I didn't answer. My brother sent 3 messages in quick succession. This is unnecessary. Why are you doing this now? You're putting stress on Mom. I read them once and put the phone down. That evening, my sister showed up at my door. She didn't knock gently. She knocked like someone who expected to be let in. I opened the door but didn't invite her inside. This is getting out of hand, she said, pushing past me anyway. She paced my living room, agitation sharp in every movement. Mom's a mess. Dad's furious. The wedding's in weeks. I waited. You've always been like this, she continued, creating tension when things are supposed to be happy. I leaned against the counter. I didn't create anything. I responded to what she demanded. Nothing changed. I looked at her, then really looked. The way she avoided my eyes, the way her hands clenched and unclenched. Everything changed, I said. I just stopped pretending it didn't. She stopped pacing. You're still getting something. That's not the point, I replied. The point is that I was removed from decisions about my own future. She scoffed. You weren't removed. You stepped away. You've always been independent. There it was again. The story they all told themselves. Independence isn't consent, I said. She stared at me. What do you want? I want transparency, I said. And I want you to stop treating my silence as agreement. She laughed sharp and brittle. You're really going to tear the family apart over paperwork. I shook my head. The paperwork reflects the truth. I didn't create it. She picked up her coat. You're going to regret this. Maybe, I said, but not for the reasons you think. After she left, I sat on the couch, heart steady, mind clear. I wasn't shaken by the confrontation. I was unsettled by something else. How quickly concern turned to threat. The following days confirmed what my lawyer predicted. My parents' attorney responded with partial disclosures, summaries, explanations without documentation. My lawyer replied with a request for full records. The tone shifted. Language became defensive. Deadlines were mentioned. So were costs. The unspoken message was clear. Stop now or this will get ugly. I didn't stop. At the office, a colleague asked if I seemed distracted. I smiled and said no. I was more focused than I'd been in years. Focus, I realized, comes from alignment. From not splitting yourself into pieces to keep everyone else comfortable. One evening, as I reviewed documents my lawyer had flagged, I noticed something small but significant. A transfer of shares from my parents to my brother dated 3 years earlier, before they'd ever mentioned revising the will. Before they'd told me anything had changed, I forwarded it to my lawyer with a single line. Is this what I think it is? Her reply came quickly. Yes, and it matters. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from anxiety, from recalibration. The story I'd told myself about my family shifted again, not dramatically, precisely. This wasn't favoritism alone. It was consolidation. Control moved quietly early without resistance, because I hadn't been watching. The next morning, my mother left a voicemail. Her voice was tired, strained. I don't understand why you're doing this, she said. We raised you better than this. I deleted it. What she meant was we raised you to comply. At the end of the week, my lawyer laid out the next steps. You have leverage, she said. More than you realize, but using it will change things permanently. I know, I said. Are you prepared for that, she asked. I thought of the seating chart, the waiver, the way my future had been discussed as if I weren't present. Yes, I said. She nodded, then we proceed. Outside her office, the air was sharp with cold. Winter had fully set in. I stood for a moment before heading to my car, letting the clarity settle. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive. I was done being managed. Behind me, doors closed quietly. Ahead of me, something irreversible had begun. And my family still believed this was a phase. They had no idea how much ground they were about to lose. The first real shift happened in January quietly, the way important things often do. My lawyer filed a formal request for a full accounting of the family trust, the business interests, and all transfers made in the last 5 years. Nothing accusatory, just thorough, just precise. The response came from my parents' attorney 2 weeks later. Defensive, incomplete, and revealing. They provided summaries instead of statements. Valuations without methodologies. Dates without context. It was the kind of response designed to look cooperative while withholding substance. My lawyer read it once, then looked at me. They're stalling, she said, which means there's more. I nodded. I had expected that. What I hadn't expected was how quickly the family dynamic would harden once compliance was no longer automatic. My mother stopped calling. Instead, she began sending carefully worded emails, copying my father and occasionally my brother as if assembling a record. The tone was formal, almost corporate. We are concerned about your recent actions. This process is becoming unnecessarily adversarial. We hope you reconsider your approach. My brother was less restrained. He showed up at my apartment one evening without warning. I opened the door and immediately regretted it. This ends now, he said, stepping inside. I didn't move. You don't get to decide that. He laughed, sharp and dismissive. You don't even know what you're doing. You're going to cost us a fortune. Us. You mean you, I said. His face tightened. I've been carrying this family for years. No, I replied calmly. You've been positioned to. He stepped closer. You always play the victim. I met his eyes. I'm not a victim, I'm a stakeholder. That word seemed to throw him. He scoffed, pacing. You don't need any of this, he said. You have a job. You're fine. There it was again, the argument that need determines worth. This isn't about need, I said. It's about exclusion. He stopped pacing. You're really going to burn everything down. No, I said, I'm asking for it to be examined. He stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head. You've changed. Yes, I said, because I had to. He left without another word. After that, communication funneled entirely through lawyers. And something else happened. People began reaching out quietly. An accountant who'd worked with my parents for years asked to speak confidentially. He sounded nervous, apologetic. "I didn't think you knew," he said when we met. "About the early transfers." "How early?" I asked. "Before your sister was engaged," he replied. "Before any of the conversations you mentioned." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of documents I had never seen. Share transfers, amendments, notes. My name appeared nowhere. I thanked him and left without saying much. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was calculating. At work, the merger project reached a critical stage. I was offered a long-term leadership position. More responsibility, more visibility. I asked for time to consider. That surprised my boss. "Most people would say yes immediately," he said. "I know," I replied. "I need to make sure it aligns." Aligns with what? With a life I was only just beginning to define. The wedding approached. Invitations went out. Seating charts finalized. My sister sent a group message asking for help with last-minute details. I didn't respond. The silence was noticed. My aunt called. "Your mother is heartbroken," she said gently. "I'm not responsible for managing her feelings," I replied. She sighed. "Families don't work that way." "This one doesn't work at all," I said. She didn't call again. A week before the wedding, my parents' attorney requested a meeting. "Just to talk," he said. My lawyer agreed with the conditions. We met in a neutral office. No family present, just professionals. They proposed a settlement of sorts, an increased distribution, a formal acknowledgement, in exchange for my signature on the waiver. I listened carefully. Then I declined. "This doesn't address the lack of disclosure," I said, "or the early transfers." The attorney adjusted his glasses. "Those decisions were made in good faith." "Without me," I replied. He sighed. "You're risking a permanent rift." I nodded. "That already exists." When we left, my lawyer looked at me. "They didn't expect you to say no," she said. "I know," I replied. Outside, the air smelled like snow. Winter deepened. The world slowed. At home that night, I stood in front of the mirror and studied my reflection. I looked the same. But something underneath had shifted. I was no longer waiting to be included. I was insisting on visibility. The night before the wedding, my sister sent me a message. "I don't know why you're doing this, but I hope you're happy." I read it once, then deleted it. Happiness wasn't the metric anymore. Autonomy was. The wedding came and went without me. Photos appeared online, smiles, toasts, family posed together complete. I felt nothing. The following Monday, my lawyer called. "They've agreed to full disclosure," she said. "All records, no conditions." I closed my eyes, not in relief, but in preparation. "Why now?" I asked. She paused. "Because they've realized you won't fold." I hung up and sat quietly for a long time. This was no longer about inheritance alone. It was about power, about who gets to decide what matters. And the more they resisted, the clearer it became. They had never expected me to stand still long enough to see the pattern. Now that I had, there was no going back. The next set of documents would change everything, and they were finally afraid of that. The box arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who asked for my signature twice as if to confirm I was the right person. It was heavier than I expected. Inside were 5 years of records, bank statements, trust amendments, business valuations, email chains printed and highlighted by someone who clearly believed volume could replace transparency. I carried the box into my living room and didn't open it right away. Instead, I made coffee, sat down, let my breathing slow. This wasn't about shock anymore, it was about comprehension. When I finally began, I did it methodically, one category at a time. I flagged dates, noted inconsistencies, built a quiet timeline in my head. Patterns emerged quickly. Assets had been shifted well before my sister's engagement, before the conversations about simplifying things, before anyone had ever suggested I was still included. My brother's role in the family business had been formalized years earlier, with language that described him as the natural successor. My sister's interests were protected without expectation of involvement. My exclusion was not written explicitly. It didn't need to be. I had simply been omitted. What struck me most wasn't the money. It was the intentional absence of my name from decisions that directly affected my future. That kind of omission requires agreement, conversation, planning. It requires silence from everyone else in the room. I took notes, not emotional ones, factual ones. On the third evening, my lawyer came over. We spread documents across the dining table. She didn't rush me. She let me explain what I was seeing, correcting me only when precision mattered. You were effectively written out before you were told anything had changed, she said finally. Yes, I replied, and they wanted my signature to legitimize it. She nodded. That's exactly what the waiver would have done. I felt a brief surge of anger then, not explosive, concentrated. So what now, I asked. She folded her hands. Now you decide whether this stays private or becomes formal. Formal meant court, filings, judges, a record that would outlive everyone involved. Private meant negotiation, quiet settlements, adjustments made without admitting fault. What happens if I do nothing I asked? She looked at me steadily. Then the current structure stands. Permanently. I thought of Thanksgiving, the seating chart, the way my place had been adjusted without discussion. I'm not doing nothing, I said. We drafted a response that night. A formal notice outlining discrepancies, requesting explanations for early transfers, and reserving my right to contest if necessary. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. The reaction was swift. My father sent a letter. Handwritten, delivered by mail, not email. He wrote about family legacy, about sacrifice, about how he never imagined things would become so transactional. I read it carefully. Nowhere did he explain why I'd been excluded. Nowhere did he acknowledge the timing of decisions. He closed with, I hope you remember who we are. I placed the letter back in its envelope. I remembered exactly who they were. My mother called 2 days later. Her voice was softer than it had been in weeks. Why are you doing this, she asked. Not angrily, tired. Because I wasn't given a choice, I replied. You always had choices, she said. No, I said, I had outcomes you'd already chosen. She was quiet for a long moment. We thought you didn't want to be involved, she said finally. That's not true, I replied. You assumed my silence meant agreement. Well, she said you never said anything. That's because I was never asked, I said. She sighed. This is tearing us apart. I said nothing. She waited, then added, Your brother is under a lot of stress. I closed my eyes. This isn't about his stress, I said. It's about fairness. She hung up shortly after. At work, I accepted the leadership role I'd been offered. Not impulsively, intentionally. I negotiated terms, boundaries. I chose visibility. The timing mattered. The following week, my lawyer received a proposal from my parents' legal team. Revised distributions, partial acknowledgement. Still no admission of wrongdoing. It's better, my lawyer said. But it's still framed as generosity. I shook my head. I don't want generosity, I want correction. That word changed everything. Correction implies error. Error implies responsibility. Responsibility was the one thing they had avoided from the start. The wedding photos began to circulate more widely. A family portrait appeared online. My absence was noticeable now. Comments asked where I was. My sister didn't answer them. I didn't comment. Then unexpectedly, my grandmother called. She rarely involved herself in conflict. Her voice was steady, sharp with age. I saw the papers, she said. I didn't ask how. They never thought you'd push back, she continued. They always counted on you being reasonable. I smiled faintly. I am being reasonable. She laughed once. Exactly. She paused. If this goes to court, it will be ugly. I know, I said, but she added ugly isn't the same as wrong. After we hung up, I sat for a long time without moving. This was the point of no return. Not because I was angry, but because I could no longer pretend this was a misunderstanding. It was a structure. And structures only change when someone applies pressure in the right place. The next move would determine not just what I received, but what was finally acknowledged. And for the first time, they were no longer in control of that decision. Neither was I. The law was, and it does not care about family narratives. Only facts. The filing went through on a Thursday afternoon. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a timestamp, a reference number, and a confirmation email from my lawyer that said simply, it's official. I sat at my desk at work when I read it. The office around me hummed with ordinary noise, phones ringing, printers running, someone laughing down the hall. No one knew that a line had just been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. I closed my laptop and went for a walk. The air was cold enough to sting. I welcomed it. It kept me present. I had not sued my family. Not yet. What I had done was file a formal notice preserving my right to contest the will, the trust, and the transfers. A legal pause button. A refusal to let the clock run out quietly. It changed everything. Within hours, my parents' attorney requested an emergency call. My lawyer took it without me. She called me back afterward. They're shaken, she said. They didn't think you'd formalize it. What are they saying, I asked. That this is going too far, she replied. That it will embarrass the family. I almost laughed. Embarrassment had never been my concern. Erasure had been. That night, my brother called from a number I hadn't seen before. I let it ring out. He left a voicemail. "You're blowing up everyone's life," he said. "Do you even hear yourself?" I deleted it. My sister sent a message that was longer. Careful, strategic. "We can still fix this without destroying everything. You don't need to prove a point." I read it twice. This was the part they never understood. I wasn't proving a point. I was establishing a boundary. At work, the new role demanded focus. I welcomed it. Decisions were clear. Authority was defined. No one questioned why I was there. One evening, as I stayed late reviewing projections, my boss stopped by. "You good?" he asked. "Yes," I said and meant it. The contrast between my professional life and my personal one had never been sharper. In one space, my voice carried weight. In the other, it had been treated as background noise for years. I was done accepting that imbalance. The following week, my parents requested mediation. Neutral third party, confidential, non-binding. My lawyer asked if I wanted to attend. Yes, I said, on my terms. The session was scheduled in a quiet office with soft lighting and chairs arranged in a circle, as if proximity might soften what was coming. My parents arrived together. My brother did not. My sister joined remotely, camera angled carefully. The mediator explained the process. Ground rules, respectful language, no interruptions. My mother spoke first. "We never meant to hurt you," she said, eyes already glassy. "We just assumed." She trailed off. "You assumed I would adapt," I said calmly. "Because I always had." My father leaned forward. "This isn't about assumptions. It's about practicality." I looked at him. "Then explain the early transfers." He didn't answer. The mediator cleared her throat gently. "I'd like to hear from you," she said to me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't recount every slight. I focused on 3 things. Timing, exclusion, consent. "I wasn't informed," I said. "I wasn't consulted." And then I was asked to sign away my right to object. My sister spoke up from the screen. "You're making it sound sinister." "I'm describing it accurately," I replied. My mother wiped her eyes. "We didn't think you wanted involvement." "Because I didn't ask," I said. "And I didn't ask because I didn't know there was anything to ask about." Silence followed. The mediator asked my parents' attorney to explain the rationale behind the structure. He spoke carefully. About continuity, about minimizing conflict, about ensuring smooth transitions. I listened, then asked one question. Where in that process was my consent obtained? No one answered. The mediator made notes. After a break, a proposal was offered. A revised distribution. Increased transparency going forward. A role in oversight. It was significant. It was also incomplete. "I won't withdraw my filing," I said. My father's jaw tightened. "What more do you want?" "I want acknowledgement," I replied. "That decisions were made without me, and that was wrong." The word wrong sat between us. My mother whispered, "We did what we thought was best." "That's not the same thing," I said. The session ended without resolution. Outside, my parents avoided my eyes. My sister disconnected without saying goodbye. I felt lighter than I expected. Not because I'd won anything, because I had spoken without shrinking. That night, my lawyer called. "They'll come back with a better offer," she said. "They don't want this public." "Do you think they understand why I'm doing this?" I asked. She paused. "I think they're starting to understand that you won't disappear to make this easier." I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. In the morning, I woke with a sense of direction that had nothing to do with inheritance or revenge. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about restoring authorship over my own story. And once that's reclaimed, everything else becomes negotiable. The next move would be theirs. And for the first time, they would have to make it knowing I was watching. They came back 3 days later. Not my parents, not my sister, the lawyers. A revised proposal arrived by email, dense with attachments and track changes. It was framed as compromise. It read like retreat. I printed everything and spread it across my kitchen table. Morning light cut across the pages, highlighting numbers and clauses that had once been invisible to me. Now I saw the architecture clearly. What was being offered, what was still being avoided. The revisions corrected distribution percentages. They formalized my inclusion in future oversight. They added language about transparency and reporting. What they did not include was the word wrong. They wanted resolution without accountability. I called my lawyer. "They're giving you most of what you asked for," she said. "Except the acknowledgement." "I know," I replied. "That's the part that matters." She was quiet for a moment. "If you proceed, this could go to a hearing. It won't be fast." "I'm not in a hurry," I said. What I didn't say was that speed had always benefited them, never me. That afternoon, my grandmother called again. "They're scared," she said without preamble. "Your father doesn't like not knowing how this ends. I don't either, I said. She laughed softly. You always were the patient one. Patient, yes, passive no longer. She lowered her voice. There are things you don't know. About the business. About why they moved so quickly. My hand tightened around the phone. What things? I can't say them outright, she replied. But if this goes to court, they will come out. That was the first time anyone had hinted at consequences beyond embarrassment. After we hung up, I sat very still. Secrets change the math. At work, a junior analyst asked me how I handled pressure. I told her the truth. I stopped trying to make everyone comfortable, I said. It freed up a lot of energy. She smiled, unsure. I recognized that look, the beginning of awareness. 2 days later, my parents requested another mediation session. This time, my brother attended. He looked different, tired, less certain. The mediator reviewed the previous session, then invited my brother to speak. I didn't know how bad this had gotten, he said. He didn't look at me. I watched his hands, the way his fingers tapped the armrest. Nervous. You benefited, I said calmly. That doesn't require intent. He finally looked up. You could have said something. I did, I replied. You dismissed it. He opened his mouth, then closed it. My father spoke next. His voice was measured but strained. We want this to end, he said. What will it take? I took a breath. Not because I was unsure, because I wanted to be precise. I want the record corrected, I said. I want it documented that decisions affecting my inheritance and interests were made without my knowledge or consent. And I want that acknowledged in writing. My mother shook her head. Why does that matter so much? Because it changes the story, I said. And the story determines what happens next. The mediator leaned forward. That kind of acknowledgement could have legal implications. Yes, I said. Silence filled the room. My brother spoke again, quieter this time. You're not trying to punish us. No, I said. I'm trying to stop this from happening again. My sister's voice came through the screen. To who? To anyone you decide is too independent to need consideration, I replied. She didn't respond. The session ended with no agreement, but something had shifted, not in tone, in posture. They were no longer negotiating from confidence. That night, my parents' attorney called my lawyer. They're willing to add language, he said, carefully worded. The draft arrived the next morning. It acknowledged that certain transfers and decisions had occurred without my involvement, that communication had been insufficient, that assumptions had been made. It did not say wrong, but it said enough. My lawyer looked at me. This is a turning point. I read the paragraph again. It wasn't an apology, it was a concession. Add one sentence, I said. She raised an eyebrow. What sentence? That the exclusion was not in my best interest, I replied. She smiled slowly. You're good at this. That sentence took 2 days to negotiate. 2 days of back and forth, of revised drafts, of phone calls that grew increasingly tense. On the third day it appeared. Plain, unemotional, irreversible. I signed. Not because I was satisfied, because the power had shifted. The filing was withdrawn. The contest paused. The revised documents were executed. Nothing dramatic happened afterward. No calls, no confrontations. Just quiet. In that quiet, I felt something unexpected. Grief. Not for the money, not for the business. For the family I had believed existed. I let myself feel it briefly, fully. Then I moved on. At the end of the week, my boss asked if I wanted to lead a new initiative. Something risky, something visible. I said yes. That night, alone in my apartment, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window. The city lights flickered on one by one. I thought about how easily I'd been moved before, adjusted, placed wherever there was room. No more. The documents were signed. The story was corrected. And for the first time, my place was not something anyone else could rearrange. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was earned. The quiet didn't last. It never does when power changes hands. 2 weeks after the revised documents were finalized, my parents hosted a small family dinner. No occasion, no announcement, just an invitation sent to everyone, including me, phrased as if nothing significant had happened. I almost declined, not out of fear, out of clarity. Then I realized something important. Avoidance would give them back a kind of control. The ability to say I was distant, difficult, unwilling to move forward. So I went. The house looked the same. The same framed photos. The same rug I remembered tripping over as a child. Familiarity can be deceptive that way. It invites you to forget what changed underneath. My brother arrived first. He nodded at me, polite but restrained. My sister followed, smiling too brightly, already performing normalcy. My parents hovered, overly attentive. We sat at the table. Seats had been assigned again. This time my name was written clearly, in ink, between my parents. I noticed. So did everyone else. Conversation stayed shallow. Work, weather, traffic. No one mentioned lawyers, or documents, or the months of tension that had brought us here. Halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat. I just want to say, he began, that we're glad to have this behind us. Behind us. I waited. We've all learned something, he continued, and we're moving forward as a family. My sister nodded quickly. My brother took a sip of wine. I set my fork down. I'm moving forward, I said calmly. I'm not going back. The table stilled. My mother frowned. What does that mean? It means I said that pretending this didn't happen isn't an option for me. My sister's smile faded. We're trying to heal. So am I replied. Healing requires accuracy. My father's voice tightened. We've acknowledged mistakes. You've acknowledged omissions, I said. Those aren't the same thing. Silence stretched. My brother shifted in his seat. What do you want from us now? I looked at him, really looked. I want honesty, I said. Not reassurance, not appearances, honesty. My mother reached for my hand. I gently pulled it back. This doesn't mean I'm cutting anyone off, I added. It means I'm not participating in denial. Dinner ended shortly after. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just an unspoken understanding that the old rules no longer applied. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because the tension was gone, because I was no longer carrying it alone. At work, the new initiative accelerated. I led meetings, made calls, took responsibility. When something went wrong, I fixed it. When something went right, I took credit. No one questioned my presence. That mattered more than I'd expected. One afternoon, my sister called. I feel like you're punishing us, she said. I'm not, I replied. I'm protecting myself. She sighed. You don't need to do that with family. That's where I needed it most, I said. She didn't respond. Weeks passed. Birthdays, obligations, events I attended selectively. I showed up when I wanted to. I left when I was done. People noticed. Not everyone liked it. My grandmother, however, smiled the next time she saw me. You finally look settled, she said. I replied. You always were the strong one, she added. They just never understood what that meant. I thought about that later. How strength is often misread as availability. How resilience becomes expectation. I had interrupted that pattern. That interruption was the real revenge, not payback. Redirection. Toward myself. The next challenge came quietly in the form of a phone call from my parents' attorney. A procedural update. A reminder of future obligations. I listened, took notes, thanked him. When the call ended, I realized something important. I was no longer bracing myself. No racing thoughts, no urge to explain or justify. Just calm. That calm was not the absence of conflict. It was the presence of boundaries. And boundaries once established tend to reveal everything else that was built on their absence, including love, including loyalty, including who benefits when you stay quiet. As summer approached, I felt something shift again. Not tension, momentum. There was one final piece left to address. Not legally, personally, and I knew exactly where it would surface. At the wedding anniversary party my parents were already planning, the one they assumed I would attend quietly, the one that would test whether they truly understood what had changed, or whether they believed time alone would put me back in my place. They were wrong about that, and soon they would understand why. The invitation arrived in late August. Cream cardstock, embossed lettering, formal but not extravagant. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary. A backyard event at the house where we'd grown up. Catered. Speeches planned. Family and close friends. My name was printed correctly. No +1. I held the envelope for a long moment before opening it fully, already sensing what this was meant to be. A reset. A symbolic return to normal. A test to see whether I would slide back into the role that made everyone else comfortable. I didn't decline. I didn't accept right away either. I placed the invitation on my desk and let it sit there for a week, visible, unmoving. A reminder that time was no longer something that happened to me. It was something I chose how to spend. During that week, my sister called twice, my mother once. Each conversation circled the same point without ever naming it. It would mean a lot to them if you came, my sister said. We just want everyone together, my mother said. No one asked how I felt about it. That omission told me everything. I RSVP'd yes on the 7th day, not because I felt obligated, because I was ready. The week before the party, my parents asked if I could help with planning. Just small things. Music, seating, timing. I declined politely. I'll just attend, I said. As a guest. There was a pause on the line. Oh, my mother said, of course. She sounded unsettled. Good. The night of the anniversary party was warm. Late summer air. String lights hung across the backyard. Tables arranged neatly. Familiar faces gathering in clusters, laughter already flowing. I arrived alone, not early, not late, on time. My mother rushed over to greet me, hugging me a little too tightly. My father followed, smiling broadly, already in host mode. "We're so glad you're here," he said. "So am I replied. And I meant it. I moved through the crowd, slowly, greeting relatives, neighbors, people who had known me my entire life, but had never really known me. The usual comments followed. "You look great. You've been so busy lately. We never see you anymore." I smiled, I nodded, I didn't explain. About halfway through the evening, my brother cornered me near the drinks table. "You good?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He hesitated. "This isn't awkward for you?" I considered the question. "It's honest," I replied. He frowned slightly but didn't press. When dinner ended, my father tapped his glass for attention. Conversations faded. Chairs shifted. Everyone turned toward him. He spoke about marriage, about commitment, about family sticking together through hard times. He thanked my mother, thanked my siblings, thanked the guests. Then he looked at me. "And of course," he said, "we're proud of all our children." The word all landed carefully, intentionally. Polite applause followed. My mother took the microphone next. She spoke warmly, emotionally. She talked about the years passing quickly, about how grateful she was to have everyone together. Then she did something unexpected. She turned toward me. "I want to thank my oldest," she said, "for always being strong, for being understanding, for giving us grace this year." The crowd murmured approvingly. Grace. I felt the familiar pull. The old instinct to smile, nod, absorb, to let the narrative settle around me like a coat I'd worn for decades. Instead, I stood. Not abruptly, not angrily. I stood because this was the moment I had come for. "I'd like to say something," I said calmly. A few people shifted. My mother froze, then handed me the microphone. I didn't look at my parents right away. I looked at the crowd, at faces filled with expectation, curiosity, mild discomfort. "I love my parents," I began. "And I'm glad they're celebrating 40 years together." Polite nods, smiles. "But I want to be clear about something," I continued. "Strength isn't the same as silence. And understanding doesn't mean agreeing to be excluded." The air changed. "I spent a long time being praised for how easy I was," I said. "How adaptable, how low maintenance. What that really meant was that my needs were invisible." My mother's face tightened. My father stared straight ahead. This year forced me to see that I went on, and to decide whether I was willing to keep paying the price for everyone else's comfort. You could hear the string lights buzzing. I chose not to. A few people looked away, others leaned in. "That choice wasn't about punishment," I said. "It was about self-respect, about telling the truth even when it's inconvenient." I turned then finally to my parents. "I'm not angry," I said, "but I am done disappearing." I handed the microphone back to my mother and sat down. No applause. No outrage. Just silence. And in that silence, something profound happened. The story changed. People began talking again, slowly, uncertainly. The party resumed, but the tone was different. More careful, less performative. My parents didn't approach me again that night. Neither did my siblings. When I left, my grandmother caught my arm. "Well done," she said simply. I drove home with the windows down, heart steady, mind clear. I hadn't embarrassed them. I had freed myself. That night, lying in bed, I realized something important. This was the last confrontation. Not because everything was resolved, but because I no longer needed anyone else to understand in order to move forward. The power they once held over me had depended on my participation. I had withdrawn it, and nothing dramatic had happened. The world hadn't ended. It had adjusted. The final chapter wasn't about them. It was about what comes after you stop asking for permission to exist. And that was already unfolding. September brought an unfamiliar kind of quiet, not the brittle silence that follows conflict where everyone waits for the next move. This was different. Spacious. Unclaimed. After the anniversary party, no one called to argue. No one demanded an explanation. My parents sent a brief text thanking me for coming. My sister sent nothing. My brother sent a single line a week later. "Hope you're okay." I read it without urgency, without the old reflex to reassure. I was okay. At work, the new initiative entered a decisive phase. Deadlines stacked. Decisions had consequences. I found myself enjoying the clarity of it. When something failed, it failed for reasons I could name. When something succeeded, it was because of choices I'd made. No one reinterpreted my intent. One afternoon, my boss asked me to mentor a new hire. She reminded me of myself years earlier. Capable, careful, too willing to adapt. In our first meeting, she asked how I handled difficult stakeholders. I stopped assuming harmony was my responsibility, I told her. It changed everything. She nodded slowly as if filing it away for later. At home, I began sorting through things I'd avoided for years. Old boxes from childhood, letters, photos, evidence of a life lived largely on other people's terms. I didn't throw everything away. I kept what felt honest. There was a photo of my siblings and me as kids, sitting on the front steps, sunburned and grinning. I studied it for a long time, trying to remember when the dynamic had shifted, when I'd become the one expected to accommodate rather than be considered. I realized something uncomfortable. It hadn't started with malice. It had started with convenience. I had made things easier. And ease once established becomes entitlement. Mid-September, my parents asked to meet. Just the two of them. Neutral location, a cafe near their house. I agreed. They arrived early. My mother stirred her coffee nervously. My father sat stiffly, hands folded. "We've been thinking," my mother said. I waited. "We don't want distance," she continued. "We don't want things to be formal." Formal was their word for boundaries. "I don't want distance either," I said. "I want accuracy." My father sighed. "We did what we thought was best." "I know," I replied. "And I did too." My mother looked at me, really looked. "You're different." "Yes," I said, "I had to be." She hesitated. "Are you happy?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that without an agenda. "Yes," I said honestly. They exchanged a look, not agreement, recognition. "We can't undo what's been done," my father said. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "I'm asking you to respect who I am now." My mother nodded slowly. "We're trying." "I see that," I said, and I meant it. We talked for another hour. About neutral things, about work, about the weather turning, no breakthroughs, no apologies. But something important happened. No one asked me to soften myself. When we parted, my mother hugged me carefully. Not possessively. Carefully. That mattered. In the weeks that followed, I noticed changes. Small ones. My sister stopped asking me to help with things she didn't want to do herself. My brother stopped offering unsolicited advice. My parents stopped speaking for me when others asked questions. The adjustments weren't dramatic. They were structural. I began to understand something about karma that had nothing to do with punishment. It isn't what happens to other people. It's what stops happening to you. Late September brought my birthday. This time my parents invited me to dinner. Just dinner, no speeches, no expectations. They remembered. My sister sent a card. My brother sent a message that didn't ask for anything. I noticed, and I didn't overinterpret. I was done reading between lines. One evening, sitting alone with a glass of wine, I thought about revenge. How often it's framed as retaliation, as spectacle, as humiliation. What I had done was quieter. I had refused to be managed. I had declined the role assigned to me. I had chosen not to play the part that made everyone else comfortable at my expense. That choice had cost me illusions. It had given me integrity. As October approached, my lawyer called to close out remaining administrative details. The tone was light, efficient. "You did well," she said. "I did what was necessary," I replied. When the call ended, I realized I hadn't thought about the inheritance in days. Not the numbers, not the assets. What had stayed with me was something else. The certainty that I would never again confuse inclusion with acceptance, or love with access. The final lesson wasn't about standing up loudly. It was about standing still when you're pressured to fold, and letting the world rearrange itself around that refusal. One chapter remained, not to confront, not to prove, but to name what had been learned, and to walk forward carrying only what belonged to me. The rest could stay behind. By December, the year had softened. Not because anything had been forgotten, but because nothing was being forced anymore. The holidays approached without the familiar sense of obligation pressing at my ribs. No group messages coordinating schedules. No unspoken expectation that I would adjust my plans to accommodate everyone else's. My parents invited me for Christmas Day lunch, clearly, simply without conditions. I said yes, not out of duty, out of choice. Christmas morning was cold and bright. I arrived on time carrying a small gift. Nothing elaborate, just something thoughtful. The house was quieter than it used to be. Fewer decorations, fewer people. My sister arrived later with her husband. My brother came alone. We exchanged greetings that were polite but uncharged. No one tried to smooth anything over. No one pretended we were closer than we were. That honesty felt like relief. We ate. We talked about neutral things. My work. My sister's plans for the coming year. A movie my parents had watched. It wasn't warm in the way holiday commercials promise, but it was real. At one point, my mother looked at me and said, "You seem settled." "I am," I replied. She nodded as if accepting something she could no longer change. After lunch, I stepped outside alone. The backyard was bare winter brown, the string lights from the anniversary party long gone. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, thinking about the woman I had been at the start of the year. The one who believed silence was safety. The one who thought being easy to live with was the same as being loved. She hadn't been weak. She had been trained. Trained to adapt, to absorb, to smooth over discomfort that wasn't hers to manage. Trained to believe that being excluded quietly was preferable to being included conditionally. It had taken a seating chart, a waiver, and a series of deliberate omissions for me to finally see it, not as cruelty, as control. Control wrapped in familiarity is the hardest to recognize. That night, back in my apartment, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and let the year replay in my mind. Not in fragments, but as a clear arc. The small injustice that didn't feel worth addressing, the gradual loss of agency, the realization that love had been offered only as long as I remained manageable. The moment I stopped asking for permission, the legal steps, the uncomfortable conversations, the quiet resistance, the public moment where I reclaimed my voice without raising it, and finally the calm. Revenge had never looked the way people imagine it. There had been no shouting match, no dramatic cutoff, no grand declaration of victory. What there had been was follow-through. I had followed my discomfort instead of dismissing it. I had chosen documentation over explanation, boundaries over reassurance, truth over harmony. That was the payback. Not against my family, for myself. I understood now that family drama doesn't always come from hatred. Often it comes from entitlement disguised as affection, from favoritism excused as practicality, from manipulation softened by tradition. And the most dangerous phrase in any family isn't "you don't matter." It's "you don't need as much." Because that's how exclusion is justified, slowly, reasonably, permanently. I had learned something else too. You don't need to convince people who benefit from your silence that you deserve a voice. You just need to stop being silent. The rest rearranges itself. Some relationships survive that shift, some don't. But the ones that require you to stay small in order to stay included were never safe to begin with. As the year ended, I felt no urge to set resolutions. No need to declare a new version of myself. I wasn't reinvented. I was reclaimed. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, I want you to pay attention to one thing. Notice where you're praised for being easy instead of being seen. Notice where your flexibility is treated as permission. Notice where love seems to depend on how little space you take up. Those aren't minor issues. They're early warnings. Choosing yourself doesn't always look brave from the outside. Sometimes it looks quiet. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like sitting still while other people grow uncomfortable. But it changes everything. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived a version of it, or are standing at the edge of your own decision, share your thoughts. Your experience matters more than you've been told. And if you want more stories like this, stories about revenge that isn't loud justice, that isn't performative, and women who choose dignity over approval, stay here. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't walking away. It's standing where you are and refusing to shrink, and letting the world adjust.